I was thinking, I usually come in this entrance, never that entrance. So, yes. And okay, yeah, welcome. We're going to talk about pests and diseases, and just let you know that some of the pests and diseases here are ones that are really important to be aware of, because if you because they could potentially kill the tree. And I was saying to somebody, usually it's a combination of factors that kills a tree, but some of these things could push it over the edge, right? And then we do have some insects and diseases in here that aren't so serious, but get a lot of attention because visually you see them and such, but most pests and diseases are what we consider cosmetic. So they do affect the tree's growth. So tree's growth is expressed two ways. One, by growing laterally, the trunk, and when you look at the rings, when you look at the cross section, the width of the rings tells you how good the growing season was. So they vary in width, and so maybe if the insect is feeding on the leaves heavily one year, then the growth ring might not be as big, but it's still growing. And then shoot growth as well. So how much it grows on the ends might be reduced a bit if it's competing with the insect or disease and for resources and stuff like that. So, but we'll talk. Healthy trees can resist these types of pests and diseases, and without overtaking them. So, Fireblade. This is probably one of the most serious diseases that we deal with. It attacks plants in the rose family. So, in our climate, cotoneaster, mountain ash, apple species, both like crabapple and like eating apples. Crabapples you eat as well, but pear. So if the tree gets this disease and you don't recognize it, you don't do anything, even a healthy tree could probably die. So here's some of the symptoms. This does not look right. Well, maybe what we'll do is I'm going to make a note here, and we can maybe Google some pictures if we need to at the end. So some of these presentations have been put together by committee and or other members of our parks team, and we share them and stuff like that. But this looks like it's representing the canker that forms in the trunk or the branch, and this may be a bad picture, but and it kind of looks like that, sunken, depressed, and discolored. But this is the classic sort of symptom if it attacks the end of the branch. It gets this shepherd's crook, turns black and wilts, and there's times, where our pruning contractor will call me up and say, this crabapple we got is like, just about every tip is like this, and it's like, do you want us to spend, an hour and a half pruning this thing, or, and so then we go out and look, and sometimes I do tell them, let's try and prune it, see what happens, and then if next year it keeps going back, then maybe we take it out. So here's just kind of another kind of picture that doesn't always look classic symptom like that. And sometimes it can start right into the stem or the bark and won't show any of this, but starts to show a discolored section that starts to peel off and look discolored.
Is it a bacterial?
It is a bacteria. And most of the diseases are funguses, but there are a few bacterial diseases. So here, the next slide. That's some text here. Bacterial disease. So this is one of the few tree diseases that's regulated by the Alberta government under the Alberta Pest Act. And the reason for that is apples are an agricultural crop in some places. And although they don't know of any apple farms in Alberta yet, I know Saskatchewan actually, I think, has got a small industry going there and a few orchards. And then, of course, BC is loaded with them. But that's why I kind of made the list under that regulation. Plants can be attacked by a disease or apple. We talked about all those. Rosaceae family. Saskatoon, I'm not sure I agree with that one. It comes in kind of a different form. What it gets is a black leaf, and it looks similar to that symptom there, but it's just affects the leaf, and I believe that's a fungus. Twig and leaf bite occurs on young twigs, blackens and wilts them, forming shepherd's crook. Wilted leaves, blossoms remain, so they'll kind of dry up and stay there. Cankers. Bacteria overwinters in the infected cankers, carried by wind, rain, insects, and birds. Kill a tree, one season, maybe a small tree. Not sure how I'm got in there, but there is no chemical control for the disease. Pruning is the only method of control other than plant health care. So keeping your plant healthy. So if your plant is growing more than what we're taking off on an annual basis, then we're in a net sort of growth, you know, right? If it's dying back more than what it's growing every year, then yeah, matter of time. What else can I say about that? It's important to inspect annually and prune anything that looks like this. Deadwood, you want to prune that out. Sometimes the cankers don't always visible, but certainly a dead or dying branch should be pruned out. And so we have about 1,200 pear, crabapple, mountain ash in town, and we inspect them annually and prune them annually. And the only ones we're really losing are like ones in Cimarron Boulevard in the median, where it's very tough growing conditions and stuff. And so we're just not getting enough resources to bounce back, even though we try and prune them out. So, but yes, if you have any of these species, then it's important to inspect them manually.
Can you eradicate it? Like, can you get a tree that actually will heal and not have it anymore?
Yeah, there's times, yeah.
We've been fighting it for like years now.
Yeah.
It seems to be like every year we have to get it pruned again.
Yeah, like I said, if you get the Fireblade out of your tree one season, there's no guarantee that it couldn't come back the next season, because rain, wind, insects, birds, right? It's kind of a, yeah, right. So it is a little bit ironic. Yes.
If your tree is already infected, and when does it typically show up in the spring?
Yes, like the current season's infections, actually late spring, early summer is usually when you're going to be looking for the signs of this. So, and pruning time is, I mean, if you see it and you can get to it in the summer, by all means, just try not to prune during wet, rainy periods. Hot, dry conditions are better because we are making wounds, right? And it's important to make proper cuts, and in our fall pruning course, you can come to that and learn how to do that. But make a proper cut and prune. Pruning in the summer can be good because the tree is producing lots of leaves and producing food and stuff like that. So if you're going to prune a tree aggressively, typically summertime is a good time to do it, and you'll get less suckering or water sprouts from over pruning. If you over prune a tree, it'll
explode and try and recover what it lost. So yes, pruning in the dormant season for diseases though is ideal. So arborists and trained professionals can tell, you know, if the tree's diseased in the winter time. To the average person, it might be a bit more difficult. So this fellow's question, when to look for it, is important because that'll give you the telltale signs. Any other questions?
How often should you be fertilizing it to make it healthy?
So, you know, when I ran a business, working with clients, residential people, fertilize if the tree looks like it needs it. So if the tree is growing and has nice leaves, and then it's probably getting what it wants. The thing you really want to avoid with fertilizing and this disease is too much nitrogen, because that soft, lush growth is real susceptible. So it's because it's tender, right? And so, yes, in terms of plant health care, there are probably some good notes that I don't want to forget the next time, but you want to fertilize to promote root growth, not shoot growth, right? So low nitrogen, higher phosphorus and potassium. Big classic sort of transplanting fertilizer ratio is 10-50-10. And that's when you transplant a tree, you want root growth, because the tree is only going to be as healthy as the roots are. And so to get healthy shoot growth, you want healthy roots. And so yes, don't over fertilize if you're trying to manage this disease unless you use root promoting fertilizer. Okay, good question. Anything else? Yes. Be about it for that one. Black knot. So this is one disease that our predecessors in Okotoks really tried to focus on, and when it comes right down to it, it's not the most, it's unsightly, but it's not likely to kill the tree especially if we inspect annually and prune out any signs of infection. So we got about 400 or so of these in our inventory, Schubert chokecherries, and mostly a couple of maydays, which is the two species that this disease likes, and also our western chokecherry in the river valley, and it's a native disease that the western chokecherry is adapted to. The branch dies back, it has a strong suckering growth habit, and it'll push up another shoot, right? So it's always recycling new for stuff that dies back. When you got a single specimen in your front yard, then you can't really let it behave the way it wants. And Schubert chokecherries sucker quite a bit. You can see this is multi-stemmed one here. But yes, unsightly, agree. In terms of, like, is it going to kill your tree? Probably not if you prune and inspect annually. I mean, even trees that get an infection in the main stem, the tree will still continue to live. Some arborists I know have tried to like cut it out. Sure, and the tree's still living too, right? So generally speaking, if we get a big infection in the main stem, we cut it out and plant a different tree. Because inspecting and annually and pruning annually is expensive, and so we want trees that are as high maintenance. So one of our big substitutes for Schubert chokecherries is Japanese tree lilacs and buckeyes. A couple of good substitutes that have maybe a similar size and ornamental value and stuff like that. Future chokecherries are quite pretty. They get a nice white flower and it smells nice, and they get fruit, attracts birds, and and nice purple leaves, and it's quite an interesting plant. So, but since I've been in here, or since here 2007, I have not planted a single sugar choke yet. And actually, up until just recently, only a few crab apples. And we selected the snowbird crab apple, which is fruitless, because yeah, crab apples attract deer, and I don't want that either. So, and our predecessors, yeah, planted crab apples like crazy, and
The
it's
deer love it.
biting us bad. So, and I manage the wildlife portfolio too, so I hear it all the time. So very easy to distinguish. You can see looks like a big black knot on the end of the stick. In the industry, there's another term for it, but it includes a swear word, so I won't say it. Native fungal disease. So yes, the western chokecherry, we've got a couple of poster childs along our pathway that are just loaded. People call me up, oh yeah, exactly. I said, well, like, we don't do anything in natural areas. It's just cost prohibitive, and like we were saying, like this stuff gets spread, wind, rain, stuff like that. We could clean every piece of black knot out of the river valley, and next year we'd have black knot again. It'd be like, that would be this kind of discouraging. Not a regulated pest. The only other tree disease that is regulated is Dutch elm disease, and it's the elm bark beetle that's really the spreader of the disease. I'm pretty sure it's in our list. Better be.
So
yes,
what's inside the actual choke? Is it just a fungal growth on the tree then?
Yeah, and in the springtime it gets kind of whitish and stuff. That's when the spores go. So
It looks like
in terms of timing, if you see an infection, prune it out. Like, just get rid of it at the time. Okay, and typically you want to come below the infection a little bit. Oh, that was the thing with the Fireblade. With stem diseases, it's important to try and get beyond where it is. Like it'll attack here and then start migrating down within the wood. So if you cut here to a nice leader or something like that, and the pith or the center is discolored, then you might have to go a little bit further, right? And hypoxalan canker in our poplar trees is almost impossible to, like once it gets it, it's really hard to get below it enough to stop it. So Fireblade is similar. I'm gonna make another note from that. Thank you for your time and trying to improve it and make it a little bit better every time. So fungus forms the knot, tissue removed early, infected trees are likely to die from it. It's easier to prune in the winter. It shows up like a big sore thumb, and no chemical control. So there are fungicides out there, but you spray a fungicide on a tree and rain comes through and it's like, yeah, and then the timing, and then you get to do it, and so it's not practical. Fungicides are very appropriate in a greenhouse setting and seedlings and stuff like that, but not in a mature landscape. Yes?
So once, when you see it flung in the back alleyway, once cut, can it still carry?
Potentially, it might have one last gasp, whatever, but no, once it needs live wood to feed on. So yes, once you cut it off and it drops to the ground, the organism won't be able to kind of carry on its life cycle, but depending on the time of year, it still might have spores that if you tap it. So dispose of it in your garbage or take it to the landfill, and they do have a branch pile at the landfill, but we want to put it in where it's going to get big clay cap. Just to be safe. So yes, cosmetic kind of disease more so, but we bring it up because everybody's like, oh, black knot, black knot. And we are slowly, I think, yeah, educating people, and we don't get nearly as many calls about black knot as we used to. Which is good. Fall needle cast. So fall needle cast, this isn't a disease at all. It's just natural needle drop, but we get calls every fall saying, oh, my trees are turning yellow and the needles are falling off. And this here doesn't look right. This looks like real needle cast, actually. There is a needle cast fungus that will attack the leaves, but it's attacking these new leaves out on the end near the shoot. So I'm not sure if that's supposed to show the difference between a fungus needle cast and a fall or natural needle cast, this is very typical sort of look. So the trees in the fall, like evergreens, have leaves or needles year round, but the leaves and the needles are the same. The needles don't live forever. So spruce, it's about 5 to 7 years. Pine, about 3 to 5 years. That's why pine tend to look a bit more open. Spruce and fir tend to be more dense. We don't have really much fir here. We are starting to plant more Douglas fir, which isn't a true fir. We do have a couple of true firs, but anyways, this yellowing happens in the fall, kind of before winter comes, and it's usually about the top or bottom 2/3 of the tree, and it's the interior needles. So if you see that happening, it's probably just fall needle cast, and that's natural. It's not a disease or anything. Like I said, there are some needle cast there's some funguses that do call needle cast, and right now our spruce. We've sent samples into Brooks, and they couldn't verify if it was rhizospira, but they said it's some type of needle cast disease. And if you look around town, there's quite a few spruce that are, and it doesn't take long. The fountain tire is a real good example there. I encourage you to watch the road when you're driving around town, not the trees like I do, but anyways, yes. And your travels, when you're walking the pathways and such, you'll maybe see that this is going on. I think we do talk about rhizospira here, and it's really kind of a troubling because there's no real control other than pruning it out, and it's like one of those things, we try and prune it out, and then next year is more, and it's like, so diversification of your tree species is important. Yeah, in terms of disease and pest management, I don't know if I go into it later, but on our scale, like on a municipal scale, we got an inventory of 15,000 trees or so, and in manicured areas, and it's important to diversify, because if we have, like we were saying, you know, that talking with the educators here, as you know, we talk more about climate change and the environment. They like plant native plants and native species because they're adapted to the climate and stuff. And they are, and that's good. But native trees in our area, we got about 5, maybe, right? And if we plant the whole town full of aspen and forest tent caterpillar comes raging through, it's one of those insects that might not kill the tree, but it certainly can set them back. And hypoxalan canker can kill trees, poplar and stuff. So it's important to diversify. So we're talking plant health care. I know it's more difficult on a residential scale because you don't have the ability and space to plant 5 different tree species.
I was in Jasper a few years ago and noticed that a lot of the pine trees had yellow ends. You could see it everywhere we
Right,
look.
there's the mountain pine beetle, which, yeah, kills
Well, we were
trees.
told by the park ranger that they felt it was because of climate change and the trees were becoming really stressed because of an increase in temperature, but
Yeah,
it
yeah,
was shocking to see
Or
how
drought.
many of them were really struggling.
yeah, for sure. It's, yeah, kind of a, I think a concerning thing, for sure. Okay, so timing of the yellow is important. That's what we said. If it's in the fall, it's lower 2/3. Needle discoloration during the spring, summer month is more indicative of pests and diseases. Yellowing is more irregular, sometimes very localized as opposed to all over, right? It's good if you notice any yellowing changes your trees because it's an indication you're observant. Monitoring the health of your trees. So, yeah. So, if we want to keep our trees healthy, have a look at them, monitor them, and that's important. Okay. The next one is a very serious disease which can kill a spruce. So cytospora canker usually starts out like a very conspicuous branch that's just like dying back. And if upon further inspection you see sap oozing out of the branch or the trunk, heaven forbid, because that's a more serious situation. And here it is in the trunk. This whitish, bluish sort of look to the sap is an indication that it's cytospora canker. And yes, left unchecked, it can kill a tree. My neighbor across the street had a big 50-foot Colorado spruce that had it quite bad, even when I moved in or whatever, and they told him about it and continued to decline, and they cut it down. Well, the other gorgeous 50-foot Colorado spruce right next to it, I see one branch starting to die back. So I'm gonna go talk to him and offer my services, and because I like looking at that tree too. And so, anyways, those are kind of the symptoms to look for. Fungal disease that affects spruce, browning of the needles, death of the lower branches. So that sap, if it's in the branch and it starts dripping down onto other branches, they get infected too. Yeah, and it's usually a wound or something that the fungus will attack. Bluish white crystalline sap, stress trees, more susceptible to infection. So like I said, just water, mulch, fertilizing with low nitrogen fertilizers. Don't prune during wet weather. And this is one that you really would, it's not going to migrate super fast if you see it in the branch. Might be better to wait till the fall, because if we prune in the fall during the dormant season, and the dormant season, look at the deciduous trees as an indicator. Deciduous trees have all dropped their needles. We're in a dormant sort of period for trees. And you make your cut at that point, and then come next spring, when the disease is floating around again, now our cuts are dried up and not as susceptible. Whereas if you cut this time of year and you cut, the sap's going to start oozing out, and that's where it's going to get it. And now your infection is right at the trunk if you've taken the branch right out. So I've been experimenting at home, and our poor arborists would probably cringe at what I'm doing because I'm making stub cuts. And so I've got an infected branch, and instead of cutting it off right at the trunk, because I don't want the infection to get there, I've been cutting it off. And what I'm noticing is dead branches can't get this disease. So if the branch, I cut it, and maybe it drips sap here, away from the trunk and other branches, once it dies off, then I can cut it at the trunk. But anyways, typically we want to cut at the trunk because that's where the collar is and that's what arborists do. But I'm experimenting a bit. And in fact, within our maintenance of our spruce trees, we're not pruning out deadwood. And aesthetically, you know, for a residential home, yeah, most arborists, they'll come, let's take the deadwood out of the spruce, right? And, but the tree can't get the cytosphore branch or through a dead branch. So the branch is dead, then, but as soon as we cut that branch off, now that wound is there, right? And so anyways, that's,
So is a tree bloom dressing then not a good idea in a fir
it
tree?
is not in any tree.
Never, never?
Never ever. So, paints, you know, it's really not doing anything. Tar and stuff that they
Yeah.
used to do actually traps moisture and creates a little crevice for insects to live and stuff. So, proper pruning is the key to the wound healing quickly and before something gets into that wound. Generally speaking, the less you do to your trees, the better, and intervene when you see a reason to do so. But quite often it's like, you know, if it's taking over your space, well, we need to prune for clearance purposes, like roadways and stop signs and garages and houses and walkways and stuff. And but especially with evergreens, the less you prune them, the better. Because the more leaves it has, the more food it can make, right? Like trees grow parts to survive. Although they can tolerate pruning and such. Okay, any questions on cytosphore canker? Next, hypoxalan canker in poplar. This is one that kills trees too. And it's very tough to get below where the infection is and it spreads rapidly. And where poplar used to be considered pretty bulletproof and in fact, I'm not sure that that's on here either, but and I haven't identified the disease because I haven't taken it in, but willow, there's a stem blight that's attacking willow and yeah, it's like virtually impossible to stay ahead of once it gets it. And only large trees now in our community I see are surviving and stuff. But yeah, we go plant a small willow tree and I can pretty much guarantee it's probably going to get the disease. And so stem diseases, stuff that attacks the stem and the trunk are more severe than ones that are, say, attack leaves and stuff.
So the cankers on the larger picture are the black vertical lines?
It's just this discoloration more, like a poplar tree has what they call lenticels. Mm-hmm. They're like for gas exchange in the twig and the stems and stuff. And so some of these are kind of natural looking lenticels, but overall it's not the right color.
Okay.
You can see here's good bark and there's bad bark, and it'll slough and it'll flake off, and the fruiting bodies are just little tiny black dots in that area. And in our forests, if there's a lot of hypoxalan canker in the aspen forest, you'll see lots of failures right at kind of this same height, it seems. And so there's another reason, yeah, so if we plant all aspen are short-lived trees, and planting singly, I've seen some beautiful singly planted aspen, and in fact, there's one up at the track at Wiley Park, right on the edge of this escarpment. It's just a fantastic specimen that's still quite healthy. But poplar are generally short-lived trees anyways, and so that's why they grow in these colonies and stuff, because they create like kind of a community, and they're all connected and stuff. But singly planted trees, you get canker and pretty much game over. can we say here? So similar fungus. Leaves, it's saying initially small, turn yellow to brown. Sometimes you can see a canker in the main stem without any effect of the branches at all. But typically, if the infection's right where a branch is coming out, that branch, yeah, typically will die back. Yellowish orange sunken area. And black and yellow mottled. No chemical treatment, unfortunately. And keeping trees healthy is key. Same. So, yeah, there's not a lot of ways to do it. It's kind of just recognizing the ones you need to know what to do with. But the treatment is quite often the same for diseases. Pests, a little different. Insects, there are treatments that we can provide that can control their population. Bronze leaf disease, this is one that we thought might run rampant. And we've seen some in town, and I haven't seen it in native aspen yet, but it's common in Swedish columnar aspen and tower poplar. And so these are one of my favorite trees. In fact, one of my worst most liked trees, or disliked trees. And but they do have a place in tight areas where you can't accommodate a large tree sometimes. But I always tell people, if you want aspen, just plant the native one. They're fairly upright growing anyways. And especially if you put in a tree and it's got lots of competition, it's gonna grow upwards. Like when you go into the forest, the trees all growing close together, they grow up. There's no branches, they don't grow out. Whereas if you get a tree, and they call them wolf trees, I'm not sure why, maybe because they're bushy, where a tree singly planted with no competition around it at all, it's going to be this big, broad, sort of looking tree, right? It's going to grow out and it's not going to grow up as much. So putting an aspen in a situation like this, yeah, it's going to want to grow up and certainly going to need some pruning and for clearance purposes, but again, this one, the same sort of idea. You got to recognize it and try and prune it out. But fortunately, it doesn't seem to be running quite as rampant. When it first came out, we thought there was speculation it got introduced from Manitoba on just plant stock, I guess. And so we were pretty worried. Here's the symptoms. This starts happening kind of in the summer. So you gotta be careful. Swedish aspen, columnar aspen kind of have a bronzy look in the spring when they come out. So don't make any quick judgments early in the spring. Wait till kind of mid-season. Here, we'll go to the next page and then we'll probably, sure I'm saying this right. So actually this is one fungal or foliar that starts in the foliage that actually gets into the stem. Usually that's not the case. Usually the foliar diseases stay on the leaves and they're mostly cosmetic, but this one can transfer from the leaves into the twig trunk. So these are highly susceptible tower poplar, Swedish columnar. Like I said, I haven't seen it in an aspen yet. So this is good. First appear midsummer. And yellowish orange. That vein, this here is kind of the classic sort of symptom. So if the veins are still green and the rest of the leaf is brown, then it's quite likely the bronze leaf disease. And register chemicals, burn it out, your tree's healthy. And yeah, it says here dispose, do burying, burning. all disease material kind of should be treated that way. Okay. Dutch elm disease. So maybe you want to take this one. She says she did a Dutch elm disease presentation
In school, a long time ago, yeah.
But anyways,
But you can tell because you'd see the bark on the ground, you flipped it over, there'd be all the beetle trails.
exactly all these galleries that they make, right? So Dutch elm disease is a fungus, and it clogs the circulatory or the transport system within the tree, and then it starts to wilt, turn yellow, and then brown, and then starts to die. And the fungus is spread by elm bark beetles, and there's a native elm bark beetle, and there's a European elm bark beetle. And there might even be one other one. But so our monitoring monitors the beetles to see, and then we get an idea of whether or not the potential to get it or here or not. Alberta is unique. We have the largest stand of elm that is unaffected by Dutch elm disease. There have been 2 confirmed cases in Alberta, one in Wainwright a couple of decades ago, and the most recent one actually in Lethbridge just a couple of years ago. And but they were identified and destroyed, and yeah, Alberta has millions of elm trees throughout communities, and there's a few in BC, but not many. They don't have Dutch elm disease either, but they don't have near the inventory that we do in Alberta. And so this is a regulated pest under the Agricultural Pest Act, and we'll go through it here. I don't want to miss anything, but keeping your tree healthy is key, and we have a society to prevent Dutch elm disease that works with the government and has helped create pruning bans to help control the spread, because the insects are attracted to by pheromones that the trees give off. So dead wood and fresh cuts, they can smell these things from miles away, right? So insects are pretty amazing that way. Yeah, just like sharks can smell a drop of blood, from, kilometers away. It's so that's a very important thing, and probably one of the things that's helping us fend off this disease in our province. It's really quite remarkable that because it's in Saskatchewan and it's right on the edge there. So what's really important, we don't. Oh yeah, okay. I'm getting ahead of myself. It's all in here. So under the Pest Act, only time it's legal to prune elms in Alberta is October 1st to March 31st. The only exceptions to that would be safety or something, like if we have an elm that blows apart in a windstorm, we got to go prune it and take it down or do something with it. Or, say an elm tree is blocking a stop sign, well, we got to, can't wait till the pruning ban to do that. So. During this time, native elm bark beetles and European ones are active, and so that's why we're not pruning during that time. Early symptoms appear later in the half of June, middle of July. They wilt, they droop, they curl, turn brown, remain on the tree. A good indicator. Late season infections easily confused with normal seasonal changes in fall color. Probably the key feature there would be if the leaves turn yellow in the fall and then don't fall off. That might be an indicator. If at any point you think you got Dutch elm disease, you can call me or you can call the Society to Prevent Dutch Elm Disease. Like, we want to get it tested and determine it. Elm bark beetles feed on healthy elms it's essential deadwood be removed. So yeah, they're attracted to deadwood. So when we are pruning our elms during the winter months, we want to get all the deadwood out of them. That's important because they're attracted to deadwood, and that's why it's important not to store dead firewood or elm wood either, because when they discovered the infected elm, they were inspecting private yards for firewood and all kinds of stuff. Like the Canadian Food Inspection Agency gets involved too, I believe. Park beetles, illegal to transport and store elm firewood. This is important for all diseases, like some of the most serious diseases and pests that are in North America were transported here on shipping crates that were untreated and stuff like this. And now emerald ash borer is an Asian species that is destroying ash trees at an incredible rate out east, similar to Dutch elm disease. Like they're dropping like flies, right? It's
Thousands and thousands.
millions. Millions. Yeah, it's pretty scary. Right now, we'll talk about it. It's in Manitoba. Hasn't migrated any further west that we know. With those prevailing winds will keep them, but a piece of firewood in someone's backyard or truck in Manitoba come to Alberta. So we have in Alberta bins where you can drop off firewood and stuff at the border. So yes, wherever you go, whatever you do, burn local wood. Don't transport stuff around. And oh yes, it's in Montana too. So like I said, the fact that we've been able to keep it out is really quite an achievement, and the Society to Prevent Dutch Elm Disease deserves a lot of that credit. Okay, so we don't have Dutch elm disease. Just keep inspecting your elms and look for wilting branches and symptoms, and call me if you think you see something. White pine weevil. This is a cosmetic pest. It's not going to kill the tree because it only attacks the terminal leader. Terminal leader is the main one on the conifer, and it's got a really confusing name because here it attacks Colorado spruce primarily. Does also attack white spruce, but the stem has to be kind of a minimum diameter before this insect feels comfortable calling it home. So white spruce, the terminal leader, tends to be quite thinner, and so you don't usually see it as often in white spruce as you do Colorado, which have a nice, real thick kind of twig and stem, and they love Colorado spruce.
So does the larva turn into that horrible looking beetle?
Yes. So here's our larvae. They are feeding underneath the bark up here at the top of the tree. And when they emerge, they look like that. And they think they overwinter in the duff layer below, typically. So we want to mulch trees, but there's like mulch too, right?
Okay.
So, but disturbing it might be a way to disrupt their life cycle a little bit. But essentially, yeah, you try and look for it in the spring when it's just happening and it starts to form that shepherd's crook and it's wilting. This stage where it's all brown, they've flown the coop. So if we prune it now, we're just getting rid of the damage that they created. But if we can prune it while they're still in there, then we're removing them from the population and hopefully having an effect on the overall population. So the last few years, this hasn't been too bad. In fact, last year we didn't even, we have a contract, but we said we don't need the services this year. There's not enough weevil. But typically you want to inspect your trees every year at the time when this is happening. And it's in the spring, typically our stampede week is when we start looking for this. Usually a little bit before, but by early mid-July, this should start showing up. And yeah, the fact that we've had this contract for probably half a dozen years now, we're not seeing as much anymore. So it could be climate related. Pests and diseases are affected that way. You know, they have cycles boom like the rabbit and the hare and stuff like that, right? Or the hare and the lynx, that's it. And anyways, it's been pretty good the last few years. Usually hot, dry, like open grown Colorado spruce in the middle of a exposed site, under stress. That's what these guys like to target. And typically, once they get, kind of above that 20-foot mark, you tend to see less infections. They like the smaller trees. But I've seen them on trees too. Okay, go to the top. So yes, out east they probably attack white pine, but we don't have an inventory of white pine here. Edmonton has a few more white pine in their community, but right now we have one, and it's in Downey, and somebody just planted it on the edge of the escarpment behind their yard, and I'm claiming it because it's on town property. It's beautiful. It's quite nice, but they're sensitive to alkali soils. Trees prefer acidic soils, and so if in the prairies where we have high alkaline soils, pH of 7s and stuff like that, trees that really like that acidic will go chlorotic. The leaves will turn yellow and the veins will kind of still be there, kind of greenish, but the overall tree is yellow. And white pine is one of those. Amur maple is one of those. So I don't see anything about disturbing the soil or where they overwinter. Anyways, and then once we prune that leader out, what's going to happen? If it's small enough, you can get up there. You could take a lateral branch and train it, and kind of tie it up with some nylon, something soft that doesn't damage the bark. But you can encourage a new leader to form, or you could just wait a few years and one of the branches near the top will start to assume a dominance. And so in our contract, that's part of the contract, is retraining trees that we've pruned in previous years. Now we've got multiple leaders. For spruce, you want one leader. If you got multiple leaders, it can gather snow and start to debris at the point where it's cut, where decay can start to get in and stuff like that. So once you prune this out, you want to try and retrain a new leader. But if you do and you don't get it and time goes on, then you can have a perfectly nice tree again and you'd never know what happened. Anybody need a break or anything like that? Says we're good. Okay. White pine. Oh. Western ash bark beetle. Now there is another type of bark beetle in our area that has a different feeding pattern. I'll talk about it after this one. So this is, I would say, a moderately serious pest. So green ash is what it targets, and it typically attacks the ends, smaller twigs, but it can start to attack some bigger branches too. But typically we're probably talking maybe a diameter of a few centimeters or a couple inches or something less. Here's the sign or symptom. sign would be the actual insect. This is the symptom, these little shot holes. The insect's flown the coop at this point. And, but what happens is the larvae will just feed right around the entire twig circumference, and what we call girdling it, and then it just cuts off the ability to get water and nutrients beyond that point, right? So control, there are, I should Google it, but I'm pretty sure there's no registered chemicals for this disease. However, there are some products that are being used for injections, registered for emerald ash borer and elm scale. That would probably control this. Injections are expensive. I've got 2 big elm trees in my yard. One is pushing 60 feet or more, and the other one's a little shorter just because where it is. Diameter, we're talking about 2 feet or so. $900 to treat one, $700 for the other. It was like, yikes. So it's like, yeah, thanks for coming by. And, so anyways, I'm gonna just, want to check that. WAB, Western Ash Bark Beetle is the acronym there. And maybe we can. So yes, there are some products out there that would probably control this, but I don't know if they're registered legally, right? So, and it wouldn't be available to the general public anyways. So what we want to do is prune. So this is one where if the tree's healthy and growing, we're likely going to be putting on more growth on the tree than we are removing it. But it's important to inspect regularly. So, and the timing of the pruning, if you can prune when they're actually feeding in there, similar to the weevil, then we are taking them out of the population. And for example, our cemetery is primarily green ash, and we prune there right when the flagging starts and we know the beetles are in there feeding, so that we can get rid of them, run them through the chipper. Tax, green, black, white, Manchurian ash trees. So white ash is a recently introduced species here. We've been growing green ash since the pioneers have kind of come here. It's one like elm, green ash, poplar were kind of the trees that were planted, and as time goes on, we recognize there's other species out there that are hardy, and we've been introducing them. White ash is one that is relatively new to our region. I'm not seeing Western ash bark beetle attacking it. Like every dead branch I go look at, I'm looking for those shot holes in that ring, and I'm not seeing them. So it just might be resistant. And veterans, we planted quite a few white ash there, and there's some deadwood in there, and sometimes it just transplant shock and stuff like that. Quite often, tree might die back a little bit right after it's planted, but I'll be watching closely to see if there's any shot holes in there, because if it doesn't, then this is exciting news, and why it's important to diversify, because even though it's an ash tree, not all ash trees are created equal. In fact, green ash are more an upland sort of species, where black ash are more of a swamp species. And we introduced a ton of black ash here a couple of decades ago, and they were clones. And then cottony psyllid came in, I think we're talking about it, and it literally started wiping out trees, like, but the thing is, we're planting black ash in the prairies and this is a swamp species, right? So it could be, there's wet areas in our region, and depending on topography and drainage and all kinds of stuff, but surface or groundwaters, but I think that was kind of part of the problem. We introduced a tree that was cold hardy, but maybe not very tolerant of our precipitation that we get. Okay, so stress trees are most susceptible. So yes, if we can keep it healthy and keep it growing, then it's probably going to grow more than what it loses. First signs of invasion is a flagging and yellowing and wilting of the leaves in the crown. The time we got till, we said we were going till 8:30? Yeah, okay. Have to talk a little quicker. And beetles lay eggs. So what you want to do where you see the point that it's flagging or dying back, you want to prune below that, right? And like I said, if you can get to it while they're in there feeding, you know, it's shortly after they leaf out. So this year things are leafing out pretty early, so could be like June, early June as we start seeing signs of this. Call the contractor in the cemetery. I think that's about it. There is another bark beetle that has a different feeding pattern. I just looked at a residence tree the other day and half a tree, they took it out, their branch died back and there's, the bark was all sunken and flaking off. And when I flaked it off, I could see all the little galleries. And so the western ash bark beetle, very classic, ring around the twig and the branch. This is like a shot hole. It's like a shotgun effect. And so it's starting, I think we've lost some ash trees and upon inspection, the trunk is just riddled with these bark beetles. And so what's happening, I think, is it's cutting off the circulatory system to the entire tree now instead of just the ends of the branches. So anyways, it seems like the young trees and the stressed ones are the ones that we've cut down that are displaying this. We haven't removed any large mature ash that looked like they've succumbed to that other bark beetle. Maybe a little research on that one, but okay. So timing of the pruning is very important on that one. Spruce gall adelgid. Here's another cosmetic pest. So it's a mite that gets into the ends of the spruce trees. More common on white spruce than Colorado spruce. And while they're in there feeding, it's this, the twig kind of, end of the twig gets kind of purpley and swollen and just looks abnormal. And then when they're done feeding in there and they vacated, you can see the little holes. It dries up and turns brown and away they go. But again, the tree typically is putting on more than what it's losing, and this is more cosmetic pest. And more serious pest is spider mite on white spruce and Colorado spruce, and a good way to treat that is good blast of cold water, especially in the evening or whatever. Spider mite like hot, dry conditions, so if we can kind of keep cool, damp conditions, then it's less attractive for them. And all trees love a good bath. Shower, I guess it would be. Adelgid, aphid-like, myrmite. I said they do not. I think I've seen it once or twice, but typically it's white spruce. So I'm not sure if you know, Colorado spruce have big cones and they kind of got jagged cone scales. White spruce have smaller cones and the cone scale is kind of smooth. And Colorado spruce, if you go to grab it, you're not going to be able to grab it very hard because it's super sharp and pokey, whereas white spruce you can typically kind of grab it by a handful and it won't cause you to yelp. So yeah, it gives it a little bit of a ragged appearance, aesthetic, and there's no real treatment on a small tree. If you want it, like just as it's swelling and while they're still in the twig, you can pick them off. But as you get to a big tree, then it gets kind of virtually impossible. Spruce sawfly, this is one that's similar to the white pine weevil. They like spruce that are stressed, open grown. Smaller ones seem to be more of a target. And if they get going, they can kill a tree. And we have done some spraying for this insect early when I started with the town. And we have not treated this insect since then, like probably at least 2010. I would say thereabouts, and I'm not sure, again, it might just be climate related. Maybe we're keeping our trees healthy enough so that they are able to, because usually our conifers are in parks, they're not on boulevards, and usually they're in mulch beds and stuff like that, so. But the few parks that we've had issues in are kind of hot, dry, and that size of tree that they like, and Hayes Park down in Cimarron, kind of way there, close to Cimarron Boulevard, is an example. Kind of a neat, or maybe not so neat looking insect. They were 10 times the size, they look pretty scary. But they attack the new growth on the ends, and literally they are defoliators. And when they get big, you can just see them just needle after needle just going. And when they're small, usually it starts out, they just kind of pierce the base of the needle and start sucking the sap out until they get to a size where they're able to develop. Yeah, like the spruce needles are as big as they are, right? And they go through them like you wouldn't believe. So there is registered pesticides to control this. A small tree, you could kind of pick them out, maybe in a blast of cold water, pressure hose kind of force. Just be careful you don't damage the bark, but trees are fairly resilient. They bounce around and to knock them off. But you can call arborist companies and they can treat this pest using a spray. We don't like to use sprays at all and chemicals at all if we can, and so yeah. Thankfully, this one's not given us much grief lately, and I think it could be maybe a climate thing. I'm not quite sure. It's one you may encounter, and if you do, you should do something with it. And yeah, they love Colorado spruce. It's a juicier, sort of a needle, thicker, and just like the weevil. The Colorado spruce is a bit more robust and more attractive, I guess. Oh yeah, the adult's a wasp.
Oh.
Yeah. So it lays its eggs in the buds, and then the larvae emerge and start eating. Oh, this is one that mature larvae drop to the duff beneath the tree and overwinter there. So disturbing the duff layer might help kind of prevent that, and of course eliminating it would probably help too, but at the same time we want to try and mulch trees too, right? Hand picked, washed off, or application of insecticide. Yeah, safer soap with pymethrin, I think, is still available to residents at garden centers. That's can use to knock them back a little bit. I'm not sure what the arborist companies are using. They might be using something else. Trounce. Elm scale. So European elm scale. European, again, coming in. American elm has never seen a European elm scale, and now it's kind of wreaking havoc. So here's the black kind of bark that shows up. What this is the insects are piercing, sucking mouth parts, and they suck the sap out of the tree, and when they excrete it, it's basically just sap, and it lands on whatever's down below, and then sooty mold is what this black is. It's a mold that's feeding off of the sap. And yeah, it can get on your deck and turn the deck all black, and the trees black. Here, the twig is pretty black. So that's what causes that symptom. And here's at the early stages, it's a crawler and it's a little bit soft bodied. We just finished spraying our elm trees, not all of them. We don't quite have enough budget to do all, but we're targeting the worst. And we spray with horticultural or dormant oil. And it's looking like it's working. Trees that were once black now are starting to show kind of normal color again. So it's an indicator that there's less activity from these guys in the tree. Because if there was equal and we didn't do anything, the trees, those black kind of just stays there all the time. Sooty mold. So yes, so horticultural oil is a good treatment for this, and it's non-toxic. Yay, this is good for us. And but elm scale injections, we're injecting product from the neem tree in India, and the seed has an extract or an oil or something that's toxic to other insects, and that's what we're injecting. So not only the injection is very safe for humans and as well too. So yeah, we don't want to expose people to unwanted chemicals. So best time to spray for the horticultural oil is just before they leaf out. So we just, like I said, just finished here a little while ago, and after they flower, just so that bees and insects can take advantage of the flowers before we drench them in oil. But but arborist companies do injections. So if you got a tree and you can afford to, and you think you need to, then those are kind of the two ways to treat that. Okay, and keep them healthy, because you know, a real healthy elm tree, if you did nothing, might be able to fight it off enough. It's like, yeah, okay, I get some elm scale, but things are good and I can put on more than what I'm losing. So this is the cottony psyllid. That it's a plant lice that was attacking black ash, and as a result, just about all the black ash in Alberta had been cut down because it was pretty. Yeah, once it got it, it was really quite, didn't take long to affect the tree and cause branch dieback. There was some registered products for injections. We tried them, they didn't seem to work. We were spraying trees, we had them all the way downtown actually. And we made a decision to, we didn't want to spray. So it's like, you know what? This is the wrong tree, wrong spot, wrong, you know, everything. It's like, why are we doing this? Let's rip the Band-Aid off, and as a result, we kind of changed the look of downtown, but we got some really cool species down there too. So the black ash that we do have in our inventory now, we've got a few, and I've seen some in private residence. I'm not seeing cottony psyllid anymore. I think they kind of ate themselves out of house and home and ran out of food source, and so the few remaining seem to be doing pretty good. I haven't treated a black ash, since about 2010, and the few we have in the inventory are looking pretty healthy, and I haven't noticed any psyllid. So yeah, symptoms are pretty easy to tell. This happens early in the spring. You can see how it crinkled and twisted, and then if you pry open the leaf, you'll see them in there, a bunch of little white bugs. Okay, let's keep going. Birch leaf miner. Here's another kind of cosmetic one, really. Typically you get one in feeding cycle in a year, and then it's gone, and if we get sun and water, then the tree keeps growing. Birch have indeterminate growth, So they flush out, put out new leaves, those get attacked, and then, like I said, water, sun, they continue to grow, new leaves come out, making food for itself again. So this affects, you know, the shoot growth and lateral growth, but it's probably not gonna kill the tree. And especially if you can give it water, it's probably the best defense. But it can look unsightly and the entire tree can almost turn brown sometimes, but be patient and new green leaves will show up and yes, that's one of the cosmetic pests. But it gets a lot of attention because it's very visual. It's like, my tree is turning like brown. It should be green.
They were cutting them down in Ontario like mad because they had birch leaf miter.
Exactly. Yeah. That doesn't sound like the right decision. But, so yeah, they're mining the tissue right in between the epidermis or the cuticle layer. And, says here there's 3 different species. I didn't research that, but my colleague probably did. And maintaining tree health is the best way to kind of just ensure that it's putting on more or putting on new leaves and it can withstand some of that stuff. Okay, we are getting near the end of the slideshow and our time, I think. Bronze birch borer. This is, yeah, kind of a serious pest. It tends to attack the top of the tree, but if you remove the dead top, then next year the top of the tree is here. So potentially it can, you know, cause significant dieback anyways. And, but good news is, I think it's kind of cyclical too. When I first started my career early in Calgary, there was a lot of bronze birch borer in Calgary, and we were taking 50-foot weeping birch and bringing them down to 25 feet is just basically pruning out the dead is all we were doing. Well, I drive by and years later, some of those trees were growing up again and certainly didn't have the same, you know, majestic look they had before, but we're living and growing and putting on new growth.
I had to take down a 40-year-old tree. At least the arborist told me that.
Yeah.
That it had gone right through into the middle, and every big wind, and we've been getting big winds, it seems more than, I was losing all kinds of branches and whatnot when it shed.
Yeah.
And so I decided I just need, so I left a stump you could use for a bird bath.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And then I'm gonna burn the wood.
They're kind of a messy tree anyways, even when they're healthy, they have a lot of branch drop, just usually twigs and stuff.
Yeah, but they were getting bigger.
Birch are really, you know, they're a hardwood, but once they die, they start rotting super quick. And yeah, I just about fell out of a tree once because of that. I tied into it and I leaned back and it was like, whoa, and I'd like, anyways, it was a near miss, but it didn't result in anything, but, so tends to attack the top of the tree. This is what the critter looks like. Exit shaped D hole. The larvae eat, block off the transport system and die back. The only thing you can do is keep your tree healthy, and if you see the top dying back, try and get in there and prune it. And typically it's hard to maybe deter or get it while it's still in there, but that would be the ideal time. Birch trees, maple trees, you want to prune in the summertime when they're in full leaf, because if you don't, they'll bleed in the spring when they come out of dormancy. So just a side note there when you're pruning birch. And I don't have emerald ash borer in here.
How long did it take to destroy your tree?
Probably years. I just
2
didn't
years,
pay, I noticed probably by the time it was so noticeable, it was at the end.
And you know, quite often, when people call me, oh, it just happened, and then I go there, it's like, no, it didn't happen.
We did prune
But-
first, because there
Yeah.
was parts,
Mhm.
like you did, it takes the kind of the middle out, the most majestic probably part, because you got your height.
Mhm.
And then it was crying, is what I called him back and I said, it's gushing water, like what the heck? And he said, yeah, that's a sign that it's gone right through, you might,
That's a sign that it was pruned when it wasn't in full leaf.
okay, is that what the crying's?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was,
That's how we get maple syrup. You can make syrup out of birch,
Yeah.
actually.
Xylitol, right?
Yeah, so,
ah,
yeah, you tap it
yeah,
in dormant season,
yeah.
and then as it's coming out of dormancy, it
That's where xylitol.
makes all the syrup, so.
Yeah.
So as arborists, pruning birch and maple in the summer is more aesthetic thing. It hasn't been proven that it's harmful to the tree, but if an arborist comes and prunes your tree and it
It
starts
was-
gushing sap,
it
that
was
doesn't look
April.
good.
When I
Yeah,
couldn't believe-
Totally,
That was too early.
yeah, too early. So yeah, I don't think I got too much more to say on that, and, but, yeah, if left unchecked and you don't recognize it, it can certainly cause significant dieback. Cause yeah, they'll target quite large stems of the tree and stuff. And, I don't believe there's registered pesticides for this one. There isn't. Otherwise it would be in there. And that's the end of the slideshow. Now, I'll just quickly, 5 minutes here, just mention emerald ash borer is a close relative to the bronze birch borer, and yeah, it was brought in, they think, on shipping crates out east, and it's running amok, and we're monitoring it for it here. We've got traps, a couple of traps in town, and if we see any bronze birch borer on it, we're sending it in just in case, make sure it's not emerald ash borer. And, cause yeah, elm and ash are probably two of the biggest quantities of trees in Alberta's inventory, right? Like, they're certainly have the highest percentage in our inventory. Anyways, it's not here yet, and if it ever does, I'll let you know in the next course.
What's the species of tree that's down by the river? They're huge, huge things that have that really rough, shaggy bark on them.
So balsam poplar or black cottonwood. And the large specimens, I would suspect are black cottonwood.
I kind of thought they were.
And the only way you can tell them apart is kind of general size. We got a couple of monsters right behind us here. And then the seed pod is on a balsam poplar is split in half, bivalved, and the seed pod on the cottonwood is trivalved. So it
Okay.
has three kind of dividing lines, and that's how you tell black cottonwood from balsam poplar, but the leaf looks identical and very similar and stuff. Anyways, yeah, there's some big black cottonwoods down in Fernie that University of Lethbridge have been studying, and you know, their regeneration and because they maybe are not regenerating or something, and yeah, there's trees that are, yeah, this big around and 300 years or more. So yes, these big cottonwoods in our river valley are historic. We've been seeing the lifetime of, you know, European settlements here. Any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
So when you talk about that beetle on the elm, we've got an elm as well, and it was a beautiful large one, and then last year, all of a sudden, it just leafed in a very small area, and then big dead branches.
Okay.
So the fellow told us to put a tape around the,
Now, is this an elm or an ash?
oh, I think it's an elm.
Okay.
But anyway, they're little black bugs, tiny little black beetles that are on this tape.
Yeah,
So I'm wondering if that's what's causing the issues.
well, the elm bark beetles, yeah, they can certainly probably cause dieback or branch dieback because they're feeding underneath the twig there.
Mhm.
I'm not sure, don't know if their life cycle is favorable to the banding. So we were banding ash trees to try and control the western ash bark beetle, because they typically overwinter in crevices in the trunk down at the base and stuff. And so if we put a sticky band and it was foiled back insulation, so the insulation kind of plugged up those crevices, and then the foil was on the outside, and then we put it on there with duct tape and then painted what we call tangle trap, and it's just a sticky glue, and the beetles crawl up the tree and then get stuck in the trap. And we were catching beetles that way. But what we noticed is for the time that we got to keep the banding on there, it was trapping moisture and the bark was starting to turn color and get
Wasn't
kind of
that
soft, and it's like, retreat. It's like, yeah, this, it was we thought, because it's cultural control, doesn't require chemicals and stuff, we thought, yeah, let's give it a try. And it is used, fall canker worm out Saskatchewan, Manitoba, they do banding. So it all depends on the insect's life cycle.
Mhm.
If the insect flies in, then the band isn't gonna do you any good. But if it's crawling up the trunk to get to the canopy, then banding will work. I don't know of any banding on elm trees, and but for ash, can be done.
One more question. Can ants hurt a tree?
They are like a secondary pest or host. So if the ants are in the tree and it means it's probably decaying and rotting, and they're taking advantage of that. Ants are also attracted to honeydew or the sap that's excreted from the scale. One up here that you didn't mention, woolly elm aphid, is another one of those cosmetic pests. The elm leaves will get all clustered up, and if you open them up, it's all these little white insects in there. And yeah, they can create that sap from coming down. In fact, in the summertime, when the sun is just right and you're on Elizabeth Street or anywhere for that matter, if the sap is coming down, you can see it in the light, and it picks up and refracts the light, and it's little rainbow droplets coming from the sky. It's kind of neat till you realize it's the insects relieving themselves.
Oh, good. Aphid cool.
Yeah, exactly. So aphid. Any other questions? I'm willing to stay a few more minutes.
How often should you water a freshly planted tree?
Till it's established, and that can vary. So if you're growing a tree and there's lots of turf around, it's probably gonna take a longer time for it to establish. Once those roots hit that interface where there's grass, root growth drops off significantly, so trees in a mulch bed will get established
So
quicker.
a bigger hole to plant it in is better than a smaller one?
Yes, exactly. And smaller trees get established quicker, so a container plant, 3 years might be good. Trees that we plant, like bald and burlap, ones that have been dug out of the ground with a spade, 5 years is what is how long we water those trees for. And so it depends.
Are the tree watering bags worth investing in, or is it just better to?
You know what, we only use them in sites where there's poor percolation or infiltration rates, so on a slope and hard soils, where you go to water and it's running off quicker than it's going in, then I'll get them to kind of slowly water and then put a bag. But those bags sometimes, especially if you're in a nice mulch bed, might be overwatering the tree. Underwater and overwater symptoms look the same. tree's gonna start
Okay.
dropping leaves and, yeah, there's only so many ways a tree can express itself. Like us, you know, we get sick, it's like a cold, there's flu, it's like, could be lots of different things, but all comes out kind of looking the same sometimes.
I have your least favorite tree, the Swedish.
I still like you.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I have a tiny backyard, that's kind of all that is.
Yeah, I'm sorry if that was offensive.
No. I'm battling pests every year. One of them or two of them I get caterpillars,
Mhm.
and then another one I get ants, aphids, and wasps, which I think are just cosmetic, but the caterpillars, I'm not sure, because it.
Are they a leaf roller?
Yeah, all the leaves get
Same.
old and, okay.
So, yeah, the leaf rolls up, but it's still green.
Yeah.
It's still making food.
Okay.
Just, you know, if it's, you know, this is your leaf area and it goes like this, well, now your leaf is producing 3/4 of what it could. So, cosmetic, lots of water.
Okay.
Or, and I say that, you can drown trees if trees, or roots need oxygen. That's why they're at the surface and the soils out there, right? Because the surface is alive with oxygen and nutrients and insects. It's a whole world under that first meter of under the ground. So if I've seen cases where, especially at the toe of a slope, and if there's heavy clay soils, which we sometimes have out here, thankfully our new development guidelines require a foot of topsoil in new
Didn't
development.
get a foot
So
in mine.
whereas in the old days, it used to be 4 inches,
Mhm.
and then everything below that was like what we call parent material, the stuff that the glaciers left behind. It's not soil.
Or the
it's-
bulldozer from the subdivision.
Yeah, exactly, same effect. So, and then landscape fabric can sometimes exacerbate wet conditions. And usually where I see it, people that have automatic sprinkler systems that are just going off all the time, whether they need to or not and stuff, so. But yeah, so I just caution people, you know, watering trees is really good, but if the ground is saturated and they don't have oxygen, then that can be bad too. One way to tell is if you take your soil and you squeeze it and water starts oozing out of the soil clump, then it could be too wet. But it sounds like your trees are growing and just like you said, have a few pests and that they should be able to tolerate and can be a nuisance, you know, wasps. In fact, down at the municipal center, we've got those same trees and we had a request to prune the lower branches because people were walking by and the wasps are attracted to all the sap that's the aphid are making and it seemed to help though. So we just raised the canopy on them and now all the insects are up here instead of down. It's kind of.
So my dear husband we've got 2 tower poplars in our backyard, small backyard, and 5 of the Swedish plum ones. Honestly, they've probably been in, the house is 25 years old, and I think they've been in there all that time. But my husband decided to go and top them, so he's topped all of them, apart from one of the tower ones.
Right.
So I told him it's not a good thing to do.
It's not.
No.
But what's done is done. Yeah,
Exactly.
typically, like if you top a tree and you don't, you know, you're cutting into the main stem,
Yeah.
what happens is moisture is gonna settle there, it's gonna get decay and that's the other reason why I don't like those trees.
Yeah.
As an arborist, I can't prune these trees. It's hard to, I can't climb in it and throw a rope in it. And if you can't get if you get a 75-foot tree and you can't get a lift truck to it,
Yeah, we can't.
how can an arborist safely prune this tree? And I like trees that have more irregular sorts of shapes because
Yeah.
they show more uniqueness and just like everybody, we're all different and even though they were the same species. And I like that about trees and being able to express kind of their natural growth habit and these type forming ones, yeah, don't really provide the aesthetics that make me get my endorphins going, but anyways, anything else? Yes,
Is it possible to get a PDF copy of your slide?
it sure is. Did you wanna maybe just pass around a piece of paper and put your email address on there?
Yeah, if anyone would like that. We're also, if the recording has gone all right, fingers crossed, we'll be posting that somewhere.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah,
You need to-
yeah.
On the town site? No.
Yeah, I believe so. There might be some kind of post.
If it works.
Yeah, the audio might be a slight issue. If we haven't gotten the audio though, and Gord is okay with it, maybe we could post it.
So all this
Yeah.
writing was in sussex.
I didn't say.
You might have made some,
You
my
got
apologies.
all of Gord's
It's always good to write it down. It'll-
Yeah, exactly. I need that.
Yeah,
I need
yeah.
this for my
I
brain.
remember it better if I've written it.
Yeah.
Exactly, so, yeah. It wasn't, yeah.
Well, thank you very good. That was
Thank you.
really,
Thank you.
it was really
Yeah.
good, depressing, but helpful.
Yeah, well, I think the positive side is there's not too many diseases we deal with or pests that are gonna kill trees. There's a few, but certainly, yeah, so anyways, if you see a tree out there that wasn't one of these species, it's gonna be worth trying, because I'm not aware of any serious pests or diseases on like lindens and silver maples and tree lilacs, like stuff like that, so.
Anybody else?
So can you call the town and ask somebody to come and have a look, assess your tree?
Yes, you can. You
You can do
can,
that.
and we do that. I know that, at some point it might be difficult to keep up with that, but if we want Okotoks to have a healthy forest, half of it or more is on your property, not the town, so we can be doing all kinds of great things, but if we're not educating residents and helping you keep your trees healthy, then it's,
Kind of pointless.
yeah, one step forward, two steps back or whatever, and yeah, I want everybody's trees to be healthy, so yeah,